Ambassador Kethra had worked in First Contact for 40 cycles. She had met species that breathed fire and species that lived in ice. She had spoken with beings made of light and creatures that existed in 3 dimensions at once. The Velith Consortium had files on nearly 5,000 intelligent species, and Kethra had helped welcome dozens of them into Galactic civilization. She thought she was ready for anything. The signal came from a small yellow star at the edge of explored space. The beacon had been placed there centuries ago, waiting for any species smart enough to find it and curious enough to answer. When the response came, the translation systems worked perfectly. The new species called themselves humans. They called their world Earth. They said they came in peace. Kethra was assigned to lead the welcome delegation. The human ship arrived at the meeting station 3 days later. It was an ugly thing, all sharp angles and exposed pipes, nothing like the smooth curves of consortium vessels. Kethra watched it dock with a growing sense of unease. She could not explain that the humans who stepped off the ship looked fragile. They had only 2 arms and 2 legs. Their skin was soft and thin. They moved slowly compared to most species, and they seemed uncomfortable in the station's standard atmosphere. Kethra felt her fears begin to fade. Perhaps this would be simple after all. Then the lead human smiled at her, and everything changed. The expression pulled back the human's lips to reveal 2 rows of white teeth. In the Velith language, in the language of almost every species Kethra knew, bared teeth meant one thing: aggression. A threat. A warning that violence was about to begin. But the human's voice was warm and friendly. "Ambassador Kethra? I'm Ambassador Chun. It's wonderful to meet you." Kethra forced herself to respond calmly. Perhaps teeth-bearing meant something different to humans. She made a note to check the biological files. Those files arrived that evening, and Kethra read them alone in her quarters with all 4 of her hearts beating too fast. Humans were not fragile. They were nightmares wearing soft skin. Their bodies operated at temperatures that would indicate dangerous fever in most species. Their bones were dense and strong, designed to survive impacts that would shatter Velith skeletons. Their blood was red because it carried iron, actual iron, the same metal used to build warships and weapons. They healed from injuries that would kill other species. They could lose limbs and survive. They could be poisoned and recover. Their immune systems were so aggressive that they sometimes attacked their own bodies by mistake. But the worst part was their evolutionary history. Humans were persistence, predators died long ago. On their home world, humans had hunted by following their prey across vast distances. They did not rely on speed or strength or venom. They simply followed. They walked and walked and walked while their prey ran and rested and ran again, growing weaker each time. The humans never stopped. They never gave up. They followed until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. And then they moved in for the kill. Kethra set down the report and stared at the wall for a long time. The next day, she met with Ambassador Chun for formal negotiations. The humans still smiled constantly, still showed those teeth, still spoke in that warm and friendly voice. Kethra tried to focus on the words and not on what she now knew lay beneath the surface. "We're so excited to join the galactic community," Chun said. "Humanity has always dreamed of reaching the stars. We want to learn from you, trade with you, build friendships that last for generations." Kethra nodded politely. "The consortium welcomes all peaceful species. May I ask about your history of conflict resolution?" Chun's smile flickered for just a moment. "We've had our share of conflicts. Wars, even. But we've learned from them. Humanity believes in diplomacy now. We believe in talking things out, finding common ground, working together instead of fighting. And if diplomacy fails..." The human paused. Her eyes, which had been soft and open, became something else for just a second. Something harder. Something older. Then we do what we have to do, Chun said quietly. But we always try talking first. Always. The negotiations continued for 3 more days. The humans were polite and reasonable. They asked fair questions and offered fair terms. They seemed genuinely interested in learning about consortium culture and sharing their own. By all measures, first contact was a success. Kethra filed her report with the council that night. She described the humans as friendly, cooperative, and eager to participate in galactic civilization. She recommended full acceptance into the consortium. Then she added a final note, marked for high priority review. The humans appear peaceful, she wrote. They speak of friendship and cooperation with apparent sincerity. But I advise caution. Their biology suggests a species shaped by violence and survival. Their smiles are the smiles of predators. Their endurance is the endurance of hunters who never stop. They call themselves explorers and dreamers. They may be telling the truth, but underneath those soft words, I sense something else. Something that has been tested by fire and emerged stronger. I do not know what humanity will become in this galaxy. I only know that we should be very careful in how we treat them. They seem kind, but I do not think they are weak. And I suspect that if we ever see what they are truly capable of, we will wish we had never found out. She sent the report and sat alone in the darkness, thinking about persistent predators and ironblood, and the way Ambassador Chun's eyes had changed when she spoke about what happened when diplomacy failed. Somewhere out there, humanity was celebrating their entry into the stars. Kethra wondered what the galaxy had just invited. In the war came 3 cycles later that the Crixian swarm had been a nightmare at the edges of known space for centuries. They were a locust species, a consuming tide that devoured worlds and moved on. Their soldiers were hatched by the millions in vast breeding vats. Their fleets were endless. Their hunger was infinite. For generations, the consortium had kept them at bay through careful diplomacy and strategic buffer zones. Then the Crixians found a new route through unexplored space, and everything changed. 7 systems fell in the first week. The Velith fleet, built for peacekeeping and patrol duty, crumbled against the swarm's endless attacks. Distress calls flooded the communication networks. Refugee ships fled in all directions. The council met in emergency session, and for the first time in Kethra's memory, she saw real fear in the eyes of her fellow ambassadors. That was when humanity made their offer. "We will help," Ambassador Chun said. Her face was older now, marked by the stress of the crisis. But her voice was steady. "We've been building up our military since we joined the consortium. We hoped we'd never need it. But we're ready." The council accepted because they had no choice. The human fleet arrived at the staging area a week later. Kethra went to observe, partly out of duty and partly out of something she didn't want to name. Curiosity, perhaps, or dread. Human warships were nothing like consortium vessels. They were brutal, angular things, covered in scars and weapons that looked almost primitive. Their hulls were thick and heavy. Their engines burned with an angry red glow. They moved through space like predators circling prey. The flagship was called Mercy. Kethra asked a human officer about the name. "Mercy is one of our highest virtues," the officer explained. "Showing kindness to those who are at your power, sparing those who cannot fight back. We name our ships after things we value." Kethra looked at the massive warship, bristling with weapons capable of destroying cities, and tried to understand how the same species could build such a thing and name it after kindness. The Battle of Vareth 7 began 2 days later. Kethra watched from a command station far behind the front lines. The tactical displays showed the Crixian fleet as a red swarm, countless dots moving in perfect coordination. The human fleet was blue, smaller, Outnumbered 3-1, the humans attacked anyway. What followed was unlike anything Kethra had ever seen. The humans did not fight like other species. They did not follow standard tactics or predictable patterns. They adapted. They improvised. They changed their strategies mid-battle, responding to Crixian movements almost before they happened. Their pilots flew in ways that should have killed them. They pushed their ships past safe limits, pulling turns and maneuvers that would have torn other vessels apart. Some of them died in the attempt. The survivors kept fighting, and they played music. Strange, thundering sounds filled the communication frequencies. Rhythmic and aggressive, building and crashing like waves. The humans called it metal. They laughed as they flew into battle, shouting to each other over the noise, making jokes that Kethra could not understand. They were having fun. The battle lasted 6 hours. By the end, the Crixian fleet was shattered. Thousands of enemy ships drifted as wreckage. The rest fled back toward swarm territory. The human losses were significant. Dozens of ships destroyed, hundreds of lives lost. But they had won against impossible odds, and they were already planning their next move. Admiral Zhang addressed the council the next day. He was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes. He spoke about strategy and logistics, about supply lines and reinforcement schedules. Then someone asked about the Crixian command ship. "We captured it intact," Zhang said. "The Hive Queen surrendered when we boarded. She's being held for questioning." Kethra spoke before she could stop herself. "You captured her? Why didn't you simply destroy the ship from orbit?" Zhang looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "She surrendered. You don't kill someone who surrenders. But she's the enemy. She commanded the deaths of millions. And she answered for that," Zhang said. "But she surrendered. We took her alive. That's what you do." Kethra thought about the battle she had just witnessed. The human pilots laughing as they flew to their deaths. The ships named after mercy and hope and kindness. The admiral, who had ordered the deaths of 50,000 Crixians and now stood before her, frowning with genuine moral concern about the proper treatment of prisoners. She did not understand these creatures at all, but watching them fight, watching them win, watching them show restraint even in the moment of victory, she began to understand something else. Humans were terrifying. That much was obvious now. But they chose to be something more than their terror. They built weapons and named them after virtues. They fought like demons and then stopped to show mercy. They were predators who had decided to become protectors. And Kethra was very glad they were on her side. The war continued for 2 cycles. And in that time, the galaxy learned what humans truly were. They were survivors. A human soldier named Vasquez lost her arm in combat, torn away by Crixian weapons fire. 6 months later, she was back on the front lines. Her new arm was mechanical, built from ship parts and salvage technology. She had designed it herself during her recovery. She called it Lucky and joked about it constantly, telling anyone who would listen that she could now arm wrestle a loading crane. They were bonded creatures. Humans formed attachments to everything around them. They gave names to their ships and weapons. They talked to their equipment as if it could hear them. On the Mercy, a maintenance crew held a funeral for a cleaning robot that had broken down beyond repair. They buried its central processor in a small garden bay and planted flowers above it. When Kethra asked why, the crew chief just shrugged and said, "It was part of our family." They were poison eaters. Kethra watched in horror as a human diplomat consumed something called a ghost pepper at a celebration dinner. The human's face turned red. Tears streamed from his eyes. His breathing became rapid and pained. And when someone asked if he was dying, he laughed and said it was pretty good, actually. Humans ate capsaicin for pleasure. They drank alcohol, a substance toxic to most species. They consumed caffeine daily, a stimulant that would have stopped Kethra's hearts. They were impossible. And through it all, they insisted they were heroes. The turning point came at Crixia Prime. Human intelligence had discovered the swarm's central breeding vats. This was where new Crixian soldiers were grown by the millions, where the endless tide of the swarm originated. Without the breeding vats, the Crixians would eventually run out of soldiers. The war would end. The tactical solution was obvious. Orbital bombardment. Burn the planet clean. Sterilize the breeding vats from space and move on. General Okonkwo refused. "There are civilians down there," she said at the strategy meeting. Her voice was firm, her eyes steady. "Not every Crixian is a soldier. There are workers, tenders, caretakers. And there are young, larvae, children in their own way. They will grow into soldiers," a consortium admiral argued. "Every larva you spare today will be a warrior trying to kill us tomorrow." "Maybe," Okonkwo said. "Or maybe they'll grow into something else. Something better. If someone gives them the chance." The consortium commanders argued. They showed statistics and projections. They talked about acceptable losses and strategic necessity. But the humans would not budge. "We don't kill children," Okonkwo said simply. "Not even enemy children. That's not who we are." The humans landed ground forces on Crixia Prime. Kethra listened to the reports as they came in. The fighting was brutal. The breeding vats were defended by the swarm's most elite warriors, creatures bred specifically for close combat. Human soldiers died by the hundreds, pushing forward through tunnels filled with enemies. But they did not stop. They never stopped. They fought through the outer defenses. They secured the civilian sectors. They set up refugee camps and field hospitals, treating wounded Crixians alongside their own injured soldiers. They separated the larvae from the warrior caste, carrying them to safety one by one. The image that spread across the consortium's networks came from a helmet camera. Corporal Jin, a young human soldier, walking through a burning corridor with a Crixian hatchling clinging to his leg. The hatchling was making sounds that the translation systems could not interpret, but its meaning was clear enough. It was afraid. And this human, this predator from a death world, was protecting it. Jin carried the hatchling to a refugee ship. He knelt down and gently loosened its grip on his leg. He said something soft that the camera did not pick up. Then he stood and walked back toward the fighting. He died 3 hours later, defending a civilian evacuation point. When the battle was over, when the breeding vats were secured and the swarm's central command was broken, General Okonkwo addressed her troops in a transmission that was broadcast across the fleet. "Today we proved something," she said. Her voice was tired but proud. "We proved that we can win without becoming monsters. We proved that victory doesn't require us to abandon our souls. We saved lives today. Enemy lives. Children who might never have chosen this war." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Some of you are wondering if it was worth it. We lost good people down there, friends, family, and you're asking yourselves if those Crixian children were worth the price." Okonkwo straightened her shoulders. "Yes," she said, "they were. Because the day we stop believing that every life has value is the day we become exactly what we're fighting against. And I will not let that happen. Not on my watch." Kethra listened to the transmission from her quarters on the command station. She thought about Corporal Jin and his hatchling. She thought about the humans who had chosen death over the easy victory of orbital bombardment. She still did not understand them. She was not sure she ever would. But for the first time since first contact, her fear of humanity began to change into something else. Respect, perhaps. Or hope. The war ended not with fire, but with words. The Crixian swarm was broken. Their fleets were destroyed. their breeding vats captured, their territory reduced to a handful of systems at the far edge of explored space. The consortium expected the humans to push forward, to finish what they had started, to wipe the swarm from existence. Instead, humanity offered to negotiate. Ambassador Chun, now gray-haired and marked by the years of war, sat across a table from the remnants of Crixian leadership. The Hive Queen, who had once commanded the destruction of 7 systems, was dead, killed by her own kind when her failures became too great. Her successor was younger, smaller, her compound eyes filled with something that looked almost like fear. Chun spoke calmly and clearly. She offered terms that made the consortium admirals gasp. Limited territory for the Crixians to rebuild, resources to sustain their population, a path toward eventual integration into galactic civilization. "This is madness," one admiral whispered to Kethra. "After everything they did to us, we should demand unconditional surrender, occupation, disarmament." Kethra watched Ambassador Chun and said nothing. The negotiations took 3 days. The Crixians argued, pleaded, threatened. They tested every boundary, pushed every limit. Through it all, Chun remained patient. She explained her terms again and again. She listened to Crixian concerns and adjusted where she could. She never raised her voice. On the final day, the young Hive Queen asked the question that had been hanging in the air since the talks began. "Why?" She asked through the translation systems. "You could destroy us. Your fleet surrounds our remaining worlds. Your soldiers occupy our breeding grounds. You have won. Why do you offer us mercy?" Chun was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. "Because we know what it's like to be at someone's mercy," she said. "Our history is full of wars, genocides, moments when group of humans decided that another group didn't deserve to exist. We've been the monsters in our own story more times than I can count." She leaned forward slightly. "We know what we're capable of. That's exactly why we try so hard to be better. Every time we choose mercy over revenge, every time we rebuild instead of destroy, we prove that our worst instincts don't have to win." The treaty was signed that evening. Afterward, Kethra found herself alone with Chun in a quiet observation room. The stars burned cold and distant beyond the windows. Both of them looked tired, worn down by years of conflict and negotiation. "Can I ask you something?" Kethra said, "Of course. When we first met, you scared me. Your biology, your history, the way you smiled with all those teeth. I thought you were predators wearing a mask of civilization." Chun nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I think you're something stranger." Kethra turned to face the human directly. "You are predators. Everything about you confirms it. Your persistence, your aggression, your ability to survive things that would kill other species. You're built for violence." "We are," Chun agreed. "But you choose something else. Again and again, you choose mercy, restraint, kindness. Even when it costs you. Even when it would be easier to give in to what you are. Yes. Why?" Chen was silent for a long time. Outside the window, a human warship drifted past, its hull scarred from 100 battles. "It was called Hope. Because we've seen what happens when we don't," Chun finally said. "We've lived through our own darkness. We've done terrible things to each other, to our world, to ourselves. And every time, we've had to look at what we became and decide if that's who we wanted to be." She turned to face Kethra, and her eyes were old and sad and somehow still kind. "Being a hero isn't about what you're born with. It's not about your biology or your instincts or your history. It's about what you choose moment to moment, day after day. We could burn the galaxy. We choose not to. And every time we make that choice, we prove that we're more than our worst selves." Kethra thought about everything she had witnessed. The soldiers who wept over fallen enemies. The crews who mourned cleaning robots. The general who sacrificed her own people to save alien children. Your people terrify me, she admitted. Chun smiled, that old predator's grin, those teeth. Good, she said. We terrify ourselves sometimes. That's how we know we're still paying attention. They stood together in the silence, watching the stars. The war was over. The galaxy was changed. And somewhere out there, human ships patrolled the borders of Crixian space, keeping the peace, protecting the species that had once tried to destroy them. They called themselves heroes. After everything she had seen, Kethra was starting to believe they might be right. Not because they were gentle, not because they were safe, but because they knew exactly what monsters they could become, and they chose, every single day, to be something else instead. That was what made them terrifying, and that was what made them wonderful.